This morning, we are going to spend a lot of time in Matthew chapter 21, verse 33 through 44, if you guys would like to flip there. If not, I will have it up on the screen like normal so we can just follow along there. Before we start reading, though, like I said, we're starting in verse 33. For those of you that are good at math, that means there was 32 verses that we missed, right? And for sake of trying to get you guys out of here before, 1 p.m. because you'd kill me. We're just going to kind of breeze through that and get you guys caught up on where we're picking up this morning. So what has happened up until where we start today is that the religious leaders did that thing where they see Jesus out, where he's loving people, he's teaching people, he's healing people, and they go, well, who told you could do that? And Jesus goes, I'll answer your question if you answer mine. John the Baptist, were his baptisms from man or were they from God? And now what you're about to hear is, as my kids so lovingly put it, the Andrew version. What is that? The AKG that they like to make up. So the way I picture this conversation is the religious leaders come over here in a huddle, right? Like you do it on a football game or whatever. They're huddling up. They're like, how do we answer this question? And you can almost see like the youngest leader go, oh, I know. We'll just tell him what he wants to hear. It was from God, and we'll be all right. And then you see all the older religious leaders that are a little bit smarter go, no, we can't do that. And he goes, well, why? And they go, because then he's going to ask us why we didn't listen to John. And so we don't want to go there. And then the younger one goes, okay, I got it then. We tell him it was from man. And because those are the two options he gave us. And the religious leader's like, nope, can't do that either. And you can just kind of see the confusion on his face. Well, why can't we say it's from man? See, the people really like John. And if we say it was from man, then we won't have the people's favor, and that's not going to end well for us. So then you see the youngest, he's just kind of defeated. Well, I don't know what to tell him. And then all the older ones go, ha, that's it. I don't know. So they go up to Jesus, and they obviously tell him, well, we don't know if John was from man or from God. And Jesus responds, well, then I won't answer your question. And here we pick up in verse 33. The religious leaders are kind of already having a bad day. It's not getting any better for them. Hey, Layla, can you see why thank you. Here in verse 33, this is Jesus speaking to the religious leaders. Listen to another parable. There was a man, a landowner, who planted a vineyard, put a fence around it, dug a wine press in it, and built a watchtower. He leased it to tenant farmers and went away. When the grape harvest drew near, he sent his slaves to the farmers to collect this fruit. But the farmers took his slaves, beat one, killed another, and stoned a third. Again, he sent other slaves, more than the first group, and they did the same to them. Finally, he sent his son to them. They will respect my son, he said. But when the tenant farmers saw the son, they said among themselves, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him and take his inheritance. So they seized him and threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. Now, there's a couple things that we don't get culturally that the religious leaders would have got instantaneously. So one of those things that we kind of need to know as we move forward is the vineyard, right? To us, we're like, okay, cool, a vineyard. It's in Ohio. We just make it a cornfield, right? Same thing. But for those religious leaders, it's a little bit different because they would instantaneously think of Isaiah 5 verses 1 through 7, where a vineyard is used as a metaphor for the nation of Israel. The other thing that we don't get is kind of what's happening culturally. So when we hear the end of that, right? So we walk through the story and he's killed a couple servants. We send a bigger group. He kills those servants. I see some moms' faces. Why in the world is he sending his son? Listen, if there's a street that's a little bit more dangerous, my kid ain't going down there. I ain't sending my son. Because we protect our children. But what we don't understand is it's not a negligent father. It is not the farmer in the story just not knowing how to be a good parent. We don't get the cultural context of the heir, the inheritance. So think of it in not as a father and a son, but more of as, and you guys have been there, on the morning of work when the new manager comes in and you get introduced to them, and maybe you've had a long-lasting relationship with the old manager, right? And you guys kind of kick back, maybe you show up 5 minutes late because they like you, or you don't turn things in quite the right way. But when the new manager shows up, ooh, you're on your game. I mean, you're dressing nice, you're showing up 5 minutes early because you're worried when the new manager comes in, you still want a job. And that's kind of what the father was thinking when he sent his son was, well, they understand that when I pass away, he's their new boss. And if they want to continue to live on my property, to continue to work my farm, they're going to treat my son with respect. And obviously that's not what happened, but that's what the father was thinking when he sent his son. And now that we kind of have those two things put into place, we can continue reading on here in verse 40. Therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those farmers? So this is Jesus asking a question now. It's his turn to ask the question to the religious leaders. And he goes, what is the farmer going to do? What would any farmer do? And the religious leaders answer, he will completely destroy those terrible tenants, they told him, and lease his vineyard to other farmers who will give him his produce at the harvest. And see, the religious leaders are smart enough to understand that the vineyard represents the nation of Israel. What they're not quite clever enough to get quite yet, they'll figure it out in a few verses, bear with them, is that they're the bad tenants. And so Jesus asks this question, and their answer pretty much is against themselves. And it's kind of interesting as we read on to know that context. So Jesus says to them, have you never read the scriptures? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This came from the Lord and is wondrous in our eyes. And if you don't catch that sarcasm, like, it's funny. It's funny. He looks at these religious leaders, these scholars, these intelligent people, and here's a carpenter, and he comes up, wait, have you not read the scriptures? I thought you guys were the smart ones. You don't get it. And then what he does is he quotes from Psalm 118. Now, they would know that instantaneously. We maybe don't connect those dots. But what he leaves us with here is this conversation and the story of a vineyard, of workers, a son, and then almost way out of left field, oh, by the way, here's a cornerstone. Like what, we just started a construction project, Jesus? What are you doing? You have to know the context of Psalm 118, and that's where we're going to go here in just a second. But before we do that, we have to understand why this cornerstone is so significant. What is a cornerstone? It's not a word we often use anymore. Sitting outside, right as you walk into our building, if you're coming up to the main door to your right, under the tree is the cornerstone of our old building. I want to tell you that is a very, very bad example of a cornerstone because it's not doing anything. It's just sitting there. So that is not the operation of a cornerstone we're working with, okay? So just out of Oxford Languages, a cornerstone could have possibly been translated to 3 different words, and I'm going to give you all of those definitions. The first one is a cornerstone is an important quality or feature on which a particular thing depends. Another word for cornerstone could have been translated keystone, defined as a central stone at the summit of an arch, locking the whole thing together. And the third way it could have been translated is a capstone, a huge thick stone that protects the building. Now, while they're 3 slightly different definitions, and they have 2 similarities in both of them. And I hope that that's what we're going to... How many times did I move that throughout the week and made sure that didn't happen? We're going to pretend this works, so bear with me and do the same awe thing in like 30 seconds. We're gonna make believe. Here we go. SpongeBob fans' imagination. Anyway, it's so depressing. The cornerstone has these two similarities. When it's built well, not my construction, obviously, it holds the whole thing together. So it is instrumental in the creation of the building. That without it, the building doesn't happen. It doesn't get created whatsoever. The other part that's really important and was going to have a cool demonstration, obviously not now, was that it's still vital throughout the duration of the building. If you take away that cornerstone, we're going to imagine, oh, look, it all fell. Ooh, yeah. Thanks, I worked really hard on that. But that cornerstone, often when it comes to the cornerstone, we think of its importance in the construction, and then we forget about it because it just sits there and it does its job. But it's still just as important. And so as we go on in Psalm 18, what we're going to figure out is why that cornerstone is so important, and then we'll go on to figure out what the cornerstone is. So for those of you following along in Core 52, you're going to read all of Psalms 118 this week. Believe it's the 3rd day, maybe off a day or 2. But for the sake of time this morning, I'm going to read a couple of the verses before and after where this is quoted, just so you guys can get a feel of what's going on in Psalm 118. Psalm 118, verse 1. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. 8 and 9, it is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in man. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in princes. 14, the Lord is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation. 24, this is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. 28 and 29, you are my God, and I will give thanks to you. You are my God, I will exalt you. I'll give thanks to the Lord, for his steadfast love endures forever. So when we read that, we hear these promises of how great God's love is, that he holds us, that he never lets us go, and that his love endures forever. And then in the middle of the psalm about the goodness of God and the greatness of God, we get this verse in the middle. The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Well, what is it doing there? Well, it belongs there. I know that's super helpful and clears it right up, right? But what you have to understand here is this use of poetry, and for lack of a technical term, because I'm just not that smart, I'm going to call it a sandwich poem. Because I like food, and yeah, it works. So when you make a sandwich, right? Maybe you have your bread, your mayo, your lettuce, your cheese, your onion if you're really weird, right? And then you get your meat, whatever you want to put on there, your turkey, your ham, your chicken, and that's what puts the sandwich together. But no one's ever come up to you and been like, "Hey, what sandwich are you eating?" And you're like, "Oh, it's a mayo sandwich." Like, that's not what you say. You say, "Oh, it's a turkey sandwich. It's a ham sandwich." The thing that defines the sandwich is what's in the middle. And it's the same device that's being used here in this psalm. That what's important is what's verse is found in the middle. The key point that the author wants us to get is that the stone, this cornerstone, the builders rejected it, but it became the most important stone. So I think it's important that we kind of figure out what this stone is. So that's what we're going to look for. Luckily, in Acts, it helps clarify that for us. So this, in parentheses being Jesus, it tells you that if you read verse 10. That's how we know this is referring to Jesus. This is the stone despised by you builders, who has become the cornerstone. There is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given to people by which we must be saved. And here again, just a little bit more clearly in John 14:6, Jesus told him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." This cornerstone, this pivotal thing that nothing can be made without and nothing sustains without. And if built poorly, falls apart when moved, when trials come. This pivotal thing that holds everything else of the psalm together, the promises of God's love, his grace, his truth, is hinged on this one thing, and that's Jesus. That our relationship with him defines everything else. And what we continue to read is this is exactly what he's scolding the religious leaders for. That they decided they wanted to rewrite the story. That even though God had come and given them laws and given them ways to live, they decided that they were going to twist it ever so slightly to suit their needs. The reality is, it's not just them, right? Every day we get the same decision. Do we choose to trust God, or do I choose to trust me? Therefore I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to the nation producing its fruit. Whoever falls on the stone will be broken to pieces, but on whomever it falls, it will grind him to powder. When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they knew he was speaking about them. He leaves them with a choice. And if you missed the choice the first time I read it, don't feel bad. I've been working on this for 4 weeks, and I didn't figure out the choice until 2 weeks ago, okay? You got to read it a couple times. The choice is there in verse 44. We can fall upon the stone and be broken to pieces, or we can have the stone fall on us and it can grind us to powder. I don't know about you, neither of those sound like good options. When I read that, that sounds like, when you're little, or maybe when you're a 23-year-old adult, and your parents look at you and they say, "Go clean your room," and you're like, "I don't want to clean my room." They're like, "You can clean your room, or you can have a timeout and then go clean your room." And you're like, "No, I don't like either of those." That's what it reads like at first. But we have to remember the rest of the psalm that it's being quoted out of, and we have to know who Jesus is, right? His character is all throughout the Bible. We have verses of the light shines in the darkness, that he's come to save the world, not to condemn it, and that he loves us. And all these different verses and all these different stories, when you watch him pick up the man on the mat, he doesn't say, "Here, let me ruin your life." He says, "Get up and walk." Right? Like every story of Jesus is one of restoration, is one of healing. So why is the saying, "If you fall on me, and remember the stone is Jesus, you'll be broken to pieces"? It's because there's a simple truth that we don't like to talk about. I'm broken. So are you. And your brokenness looks different than mine. Absolutely. And the way it represents itself is different than mine, but the simple truth is we're both broken. Completely shattered. And when the option is to fall and to be broken, that brings freedom. If what Jesus is telling me is I can come to him and my brokenness is, not that the brokenness is exactly okay because he's going to heal it, but it's expected. That when I tell you I'm broken, I don't think there should be any surprise. For those of you that ever had a conversation with me or, saw my glorious demonstration this morning, I'm a little messed up. Now, there's two people over there that could tell you why I'm messed up, but I don't want to blame them for all of it. But I'm messed up. And here's the thing. When I'm not allowed to be broken, not only am I broken for all the reasons I'm broken, but I'm trapped. And I'm locked in this prison of you don't love me because you don't know me. And God doesn't love me because he could never love me because look at what I've done. But I have a complete misunderstanding of who God is if I feel that way, right? Or maybe not if I feel that way, but if I think that way. His steadfast love endures forever. It doesn't say it endures as long as your brokenness is below this level. And we, just like the religious leaders, like to twist that. We like to try to put our pieces back together. We like to try to stick it all back together, and we can't. But this freedom to be brokenness, the reason we don't talk about it, maybe two of the reasons. First is we grew up in a place, what do you do if you have a headache or your leg hurts? You take Motrin, Aleve, Tylenol, whatever your painkiller is, you get something to make the pain stop, right? Make the pain go away because pain is inherently bad in our minds. What do you do if something's broken? Well, you attempt to fix it because it shouldn't be broken. I have to wonder where that definition of pain comes from. Because I look throughout the story of Jesus and he comes to his disciples. Don't you think it hurt to leave their family? You guys have, many of you have had kids go off to college. That didn't hurt and they're not leaving forever and we got phones that can call them. That distance still hurts. Doesn't make it wrong. Sometimes I think our definition of pain is defined by the world and not by God. And that's a dangerous assumption to make. The second reason we don't like talking about brokenness is the very next logical step, once you understand that being broken is expected in your life, is to talk about it. We talk about we're the body of Christ, right? One church. We lift each other up. We love each other. And we love these great corporate meetings when we're celebrating about baptism because look at this person's life that's forever changed. When was the last time we all met together and celebrated about our addictions and that we're talking about them? When was the last time we all got together? Oh my goodness, I can't tell you this week. It was so bad. This guy walked in front of me and he had this shirt on, or he had this music, or he wore this hat, or he was this color, and I didn't say anything, but I knew the bitterness in my heart. I knew what I judged him. I knew what I thought of him. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about our problems. And the reason is we're terrified. We're terrified for the same reason I was terrified most of my life, that my parents didn't love me. Not that they did anything wrong, but that I believed that God only loved me for what I did. And the only reason anyone else would ever love me is for what I did. So if I didn't make the grade, if I wasn't the athlete, I wasn't worth being loved. And it's not your fault. You shouldn't love me. I'm trash. That seeks into your heart. And it's not what we're taught here. The decision that we make at the beginning is exactly what Ayana told us in communion meditation. What Jesus did on the cross, it ain't about what we do. It's about what he did. Like, remember when he hung there, he said it's finished, not, okay, I started, go be good enough for me. It is finished. And I didn't know she was going to get there, but she gave you the answer. So thank you. And for those of you that have been in my youth group for any time, I know you've heard this a million times, and I'm sorry you're going to hear it one more. What we're taught is that when we choose Jesus, when we say, yes, you're it, you're my life, that we are loved because we are his. We are his child, Nothing we do can pull us away from him. Nothing we do can pull us closer. We are his. But the other choice is there too, right? And I don't know about you guys. Sometimes I don't like making decisions. They're hard. Well, where do you want to go out to eat? It's a simple one. Is sometimes you don't want to make that because what if this person's offended? Jesus knew better than me. He's smarter than me. He lets us make our own choice. You can choose to follow him and everything that comes with it. But if you're hearing this and maybe it's it's too scary, it's not worth it. Well, in part, you know what? Hey, Josh is coming back next week. He's a lot better than me. Come back for that. But in part, understand this. It is scary. What he's asking you to be open with, what he's asking you to give to him and to be honest with yourself is terrifying. But he promises that he'll be with you. On the other side, you can choose not to do that. You can choose to hide. That's okay. Jesus says you can do that. But understand when life does happen, because it doesn't matter how much you try to hide, it doesn't matter how much you try to protect yourself or your children, life will happen. There's no one to go along beside you. He's not right there with you. And that's the simple choice that you have. You either choose to let Jesus have every part of your life, or you choose to tell him to get out of all of it. But those choices don't leave us with that middle of the road. You pick one path, not both. So as we go into our invitation song, I encourage you guys to be honest with yourself as you have time to think. Be honest with God. Does he have every part of you? And what parts are you holding back? And for those of you that haven't made that decision for the first time, if you want to do that, find me after service. We'll talk. But I'm telling you, he's worth every bit of fear. He's worth every trial because he's right there with you through every step. Join us as we sing our song.